Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. And here are our top stories. Old tech items may be worth significant money, and New York's trash problems deserve tech solutions. Well, let's welcome back to the program Dan Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool. Hey, Dan, welcome back to the program.
Hey there, Jeff. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday, and I hope you had a great President's Day. You know, I was thinking about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, very astute gentlemen, and great to celebrate their birthdays. So let's jump into it, Dan. Old tech devices, 8-bit devices, the Commodore 64, iPod Classic. I mean, these devices are apparently worth more money than when they were originally.
So the funny thing is, when you send me this article, and I apologize, I don't remember the source of the article. I'd happily credit them.
I think it was USA Today. I think it was USA Today, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, my friends at USA Today.
And Kim Commando.
Okay, a syndicated column, but USA Today, great partner for the Motley Fool. So you sent me this, and I looked at it and I went, oh my God, I owned every single one of these devices. But the reality is, you could say, okay, an Atari 2600, oh my God, it has value. But they don't mean my Atari 2600, because my Atari 2600, which was a Hanukkah gift, I want to say 6th grade, but it might have been a year or two later, we opened it, my younger brother and I, so he would have been in 2nd grade, and we played Pac-Man for 36 straight hours. That's probably not entirely true. I doubt my parents allowed that, but it felt that way because it was absolutely revolutionary. So my mint condition Atari 2600 wasn't mint condition within 2 days of me owning it. And the same thing, I had a Commodore 64, but because my handwriting is so terrible, I used a Commodore 64 to do my homework when I was in junior high. Not that I did all that much homework. The same is true of any of these devices. Did I have a classic iPod? Yes. And part of the reason classic iPods are so valuable now is that people like the device and the interface, and they like that it's not a phone. So while you can absolutely buy standalone MP3 players, they tend to be on the cheaper side, whereas the iPod was a very solid device. So that's not just a collector's market. That's actually a market for people who have some money, who miss Apple having a dedicated music device that was worth a few $100s, as opposed to now, most of the MP3 devices you buy, and I just had to buy one for a friend's daughter to use at school where she couldn't have a phone attached, and it was like fairly cheap because it's become kind of a commodity.
Dan,
so there's all sorts of reasons, but when you see, oh my God, if you have this, it's worth a ton, the reality is it's if you have it in the sealed box, and why would you still have that for the most part?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dan, but I mean, is this really a nostalgia play? People, you know, we're people of our generation now, getting a little bit older. We grew up with the Atari 2600, the Apple II, 8-bit, you know, NES, the classic iPod. And, you know, you watch shows like Pawn Stars, I think, and Antique Roadshow. I mean, is this really a nostalgia play?
Yeah, I think for the most part. So I bumped into this a little bit when I did my book, Worst Ideas Ever, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. My original idea for the cover was to take the Apple Newton and have the handwritten title on the cover. And I thought, and I owned an Apple Newton back in the day, but when they were new and revolutionary, and it feels ridiculous because it's about 5 times the width, the thickness of an iPad, but at the time it was absolutely revolutionary. So I had to go buy one, and I paid maybe, I don't know, a couple $100 on eBay, and it said it worked, but it only worked when plugged in. So I couldn't get sort of it where I needed to based on the length of the power cord to try that as the cover. But I had to buy a lot of things in conjunction with that book that I wanted as images that were sort of, you know, no longer existent. I had to buy a Furby. They make Furby again, but at the time that so I paid way too much for a Furby. Or I own a classic XFL football, which XFL is back, but at the time that was a big failure. It was in the book Worst Ideas Ever. And a lot of those things, because there was just competition for it, for how silly it was, Or in some cases, maybe it was limited edition. The exception on this list of things that are getting a high price is if you have a working Mac computer, you might get up to $1,000. And as someone who used a Mac computer in college, that is not nostalgia I have. The little 6-inch screen, and it takes you have to load a disk with Word on it. It is not an efficient computer.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it is nostalgia. And by the way, Commodore 64, which was a great 8-bit computer, you can now get an updated Commodore 64 that has all the games, or a lot of the games, on it. I mean, and I think a lot of people can go out and play that. They have very fond memories. I know I enjoyed my Apple II, but I'm not going to go process on Bank Street Writer, word process anymore, on Bank Street Writer. I'm going to use Word, and you probably remember that program. So I think it's great to revisit these things, but they're probably not very productive anymore. You can't even use an old iPhone, Dan, an old iPhone, the iPhone 1.
And the iPhone 1 is one of the products on this list that has some nostalgia value. And I would tell you as a consumer to be a little bit resistant to this. I understand nostalgia, but is it really worth taking $1,000 that you could invest or do something else with? I mean, take a vacation, or who knows what, and put it into something you're going to sit on a shelf, unless that's a centerpiece of your house or has some truly personal meaning to you. I think you should take advantage of this by looking up in your attic, looking in your closet. And if you have some things that have some value that are just cluttering up space from you, I don't care if you sell your old, iMac Cube for $25 on eBay just to get rid of it, because you can't even donate them anymore. But clear out your house. Like when we moved, and you and I have talked about this, I made the very tough decision. I gave away every book I've ever read. I literally owned 13,000 books. And I have decided my son is of the digital era, and he's not a reader. So these books were not going to be the family library that I thought they were going to be, because any book I owned, he could just pull up on his phone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously different preferences, but this takes me back to my mom just got rid of my Star Wars figures, and Star Wars figures I played with those things. And there are people out there that collect Star Wars figures, and they collect those very rare, the telescoping lightsaber Darth Vader, or the Jawa with the vinyl cape, I think it was. Basically, it was a Ben Kenobi cape that was cut, right? And people out there who are collectibles, but I think kind of this inventing of collectibles. You mentioned the Furby. What about the Care Bear, the Cabbage Patch Kid, right? I mean, what is the duration of those things being worth something for the majority of the things that are out there? I think it's a low probability there.
Yeah, avoid fads. So I ran a toy store for 2 years, and we sort of ran away from selling expensive fads. Like we sold the rubber bracelets and things that were really cheap, but we didn't sell Beanie Babies at sort of the height of Beanie Babies being a collectible, because people weren't buying them for the reasons we thought you should be buying things in a toy store. We wanted you to buy a teddy bear because your 3-year-old was going to hug that teddy bear and bite its nose, not so you could put it in an attic and hope it's worth something someday. And let me tell you what, it isn't. So you have to be really, really careful with this stuff. And this isn't the 1980s where mom and dad threw away all the 1960s and 70s baseball cards, so there's a huge value for Babe Ruth. People knew to collect stuff. And the example I always give is when Maxim magazine came out, every member of my generation bought the first copy and put it away. So it's not valuable. It doesn't trade for any significant sum on eBay because a lot of people thought the same thing because we understood collecting. And I go back to the Star Wars figures. If you have mint Star Wars figures, if you have the original, the Emperor, you had to send in your proofs of purchase to get him, and he's still in the package, that might be worth some real money. My Han Solo that I chewed on is not worth any money because toys that are played with, and I would argue, even if you could get, say, $30 for a mint figure, that it's probably better for you to actually play with your R2-D2 than it is to, save it to collect it someday. And I have R2-D2 on my desk. My wife has the robot that treats Luke after he gets his hand cut off, just because I thought that was the funniest character that no one would know that she could possibly have. And I believe my son has IG-88, the destroyer droid, on his desk, or the bounty hunter droid. So buy toys and play with them. Buy computers and use them. Don't speculatively save things.
Yeah, well, poor Han Solo, bitten by you and impaled by his son in The Force Awakens. Dan, hang around. We're going to go to the commercial break. When we come back, we're going to shift gears and talk to Dan about New York City's trash woes and whether tech could help. So stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. We're talking to Dan Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool. Dan, thanks so much for sticking around.
Thanks for keeping me.
And I love the fact that we went from Atari and Apple and Macintosh and iPod all the way to you biting your Han Solo figure. That's amazing. And it shows you the depth and breadth of what we cover here on the network audience. I'm sure you appreciate that. So Dan, I want to shift gears. Trash, big issue. Almost 8.5 million people living in New York City. So trash is an issue. People putting trash on the street, disposing of it. But I want to talk about technology and smart cities. I don't necessarily want to talk about New York trash. I want to get your perspective on how technology can be applied to cities, many urban areas that we live in and suburban areas that we live in.
Yeah, so trash is a problem in any city because maneuvering trucks around, removal, all of that is difficult. I'll look at my building as an example. My building has recycling. You have to split up your cardboard and your plastics and your aluminum. There's 2 different bins. We also have a trash chute, and you have to throw trash down the trash chute. And the problem we have here is my building is a mix of residents and illegal Airbnb renters. The illegal Airbnb renters will just throw their trash in the recycling, even though every person on earth knows that the blue thing is recycling and the big yellow thing is recycling. They will just, or they live someplace that has single stream recycling, so they don't know. They're making an honest mistake, and they're putting all recyclables in one thing. So the incredibly kind maintenance men in my building, when they empty the recycling, have to literally empty it on a tarp and split it up, and it's an enormous expense. So that's an area where technology could come in, whether that's buildings having automated sorting, having, one of the things we read about was underground bins where it alerts the trash company, hey, this is full, come pick it up. But right now, trash remains a very manual process in a lot of places. And I mean, how cool would it be if when I went to open up the trash bin, if it said, hey, that's not the right kind of trash, you can't put that in here.
I was going to say, I think it should be like a gong sound and throw the bottle at somebody. Like it'd be like, and throw the bottle. I think that's what we need. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, Dan.
No, on the other hand, cities that try very hard can make it very difficult. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia a lot, and they have specific bottle recycling, and the bottle recycling has like the shape of a bottle in it, so like you can't put other trash through. but sometimes you're holding an empty bottle and you can't find one, or they have trash cans with like sort of automated opening, and like you want to make this as simple as possible. So the ideal is for a city to move to single stream recycling, where you can put all your recycling in one thing, and that's a very broad range. It doesn't have to be sorted. Or to move to full on, just put your trash wherever you put your trash, and everything else is handled underground, out of sight, alerts being sent out. And this is kind of an Internet of Things possibility. It's very easy now to have a dumpster, a trash bin that signals the person who picks it up, come collect me now.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems in my building is, let's say somebody moved on my floor and they have all sorts of cardboard to recycle. Now, the correct thing to do is to bring it to the ground floor where there's a cardboard like dumpster. But what they will usually do is just pile it up next to the cardboard recycling on the floor that's meant for when you have one or a few. So there needs to be technology that says to our maintenance guy, hey, I know you empty this one on Tuesday, but it's Wednesday and it's full, and it can't sit here full all week. It can't wait until you happen to walk by this floor later. So this is very simple technology that could be implemented in more places, that in big cities you could build upon with things like pneumatic tubes that move trash around, hiding the dumpsters underground. Obviously, it depends on the infrastructure of your city. In West Palm, a water-laden area, we don't do a lot of things underground.
Right.
On the other hand, there's other ways to disguise it, and we don't have the congestion that New York does, so it's not as difficult to remove trash. But you can build a much more efficient system. You can also find ways to incentivize people. If you recycle properly, your waste management bill from the city goes down by 10%. Just like we've done with water usage in some places, or if you put electricity back into the system through solar, you're getting paid for it. We can make people part of the solution. Instead of just sort of letting trash pile up and using this outdated model of a truck drives around every week and picks it up, but it doesn't come on President's Day, and then you have to remember to put it out the other day, and it's all very tricky. So it needs to sort of be simple technology first, and then figure out where layering in more complicated, expensive technology will do the most benefit.
And it seems to me, Dan, and I agree with a lot of what you just said. I think we need to improve our infrastructure in a lot of different ways. But there are countries in Europe and Latin America who are doing this, right? And who are creating effectively smart cities. And we had the ability, before I came on the show with you, I did a little research. I mean, we have the ability to test air quality and get an app that tests air quality in our city or location. So it seems to me like this is a real possible next step. And think about the benefits of removing, for example, trash, because health improves, right? You don't have the vermin, the rats that carry disease. I mean, there's a lot of things, we don't get into the, back in the Middle Ages with the bubonic plague and horrible things that happened during those times. I mean, we have advanced in so many ways in society, and in other ways we really haven't advanced.
So we're in an election season. And one of the things you don't hear a lot of talk of is infrastructure. And in a lot of cities, we have crumbling infrastructure. We don't have the ability to spend the money on bridges, on trash removal, on improving sanitation that we should be spending. And, I'm not running for office, so I would argue that these things benefit all of us. So there needs to be some very tiny tax, whether that's 0.1% added to your state income tax. There is no state income tax here in Florida. A tiny increase in usage taxes or sales taxes or whatever it is that goes to these problems. I know in West Palm, we have some tax money that goes to infrastructure issues, and there are very public meetings on how are we going to redo our downtown. We have a downtown that's on the water, but it's intercoastal, and the access to that water is boats. It's not swimming. So one of the plans is to redo the downtown and essentially create a pool, but a pool that's the ocean. And then there's options where it's building bike lanes. It's options where the city becomes parts of it banned from cars. That's a very public discussion, but I live in a fairly progressive city, not a progressive state, but a progressive city where we're sort of open to that stuff. As a nation, I think we have to say, it is good for you, it is good for me if the highways work well, if we're efficiently building, light rail or other transit, or we're looking at things like should New York City have an electric scooter lane in addition to its whatever it is.
Don't get me started on those, Dan. Those are I scorn those because driving around. Anyway, I took you off message. Go ahead.
Well, I'd argue, and this is probably going to offend many New Yorkers, I'd close New York to cars except for residents who are leaving and coming back. As someone who commuted to New York City via train, the city is crowded. It is too full. There is all sorts of public transportation. I would argue that you supplement the subway by dedicated some of the existing roads to buses, which is something that they built. And I think we've talked about this before. When I lived in the Hartford area, they built out a bus line, but it didn't travel mostly on the street. It traveled essentially on its own road. So it's an above ground subway. It doesn't have to wait for traffic. And it's very efficient. It's very inexpensive. It's also something that's very lends itself well to driverless technology, because when you don't have the other factors on the road, you don't need to consider as many things. And as a nation, I think we're failing to look at these issues.
Yeah, well, New York City, if you have a mayoral election, I think Dan Klein may carpetbag and come to New York, right, Dan? I mean, a lot of people have done it. You could be the next one. Dan, great insight, as always, on, I mean, what a wide range of topics we talked about. But
Are you a carpetbagger when you lived there for more than a decade?
Yeah, but you can't. Well, you're not. Yeah, but you are if you go and live somewhere else and come back. I mean, you have roots, but that doesn't mean that you're. Anyway, that's a whole different issue.
Understood. It's too cold there anyway.
Yeah, Dan, it is cold. Dan, always a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for your insight, and we will talk to you again later in the week on the podcast.
I'll see you later.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you found it educational and entertaining as well. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest that you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the change.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired of the same